if you look around the property, there are lots of roofs. Since then, it's kind of just been more lived in, and we've become more ingrained with the land and with the property, and it's really become part of our identity, which is really special, and I don't see that very often, and so I wanted to write about this place, and that was the initial thought for writing, was to record some family history. But then it turned into an essay, which was not necessarily about family history, but more about the place that we're in. And then it turned into many, many, many essays that circled around family, but it was centered in place, and it's centered in this place that we're at now. People often turn away from complexity because it's difficult and because there's so many moving pieces to it. But I think we need to lean into it because there's so much there. There's so much to the intricacy of a spider web, and to the life of a mosquito that we hate, but we need because it feeds the barn swallows, or it feeds the bats, and then they in turn circulate life, and it goes around and around, and it's really, really, really complex. But it all comes back to that place. And as human beings in a natural space, I think that we are doing both ourselves and the place a disservice by not becoming aware of our impact. It's an incredibly complex ecosystem, and it all works together, and people go in there and they tend to, ruin it, or think that we need to change it, or think that we need to do something. And we do in order to live to a certain point. But what's more important to me is that awareness of that impact. That there's a part in my book where I talk about going for a walk and stepping around, over and under a spider web. But then my dog comes through and barrels right through it. So it is complex, and there is no best way to do anything. I think it comes down to just awareness. And if we can become aware of our presence, become aware of the impact that we're having, if we can become aware of the complexity of how everything is working together and how we impact it, influence it, and can work with it, or just leave it alone, I think we'll have a better relationship with the environment. I think we'll maybe get ourselves a little bit out of the mess that we're in right now, climate-wise. And I think people might be a little bit happier because they're understanding their place in how everything works. The practice of slowness, the practice of being deliberate about one's time can lend to some really beautiful things. And that's how I wrote the book. I started with the original essay. That was a hike up and sort of this connection to the trail, to the mountain. And then the pandemic came along, and I spent way more time, and I always spend a lot of time in these woods and on this property and in this place, but I spent way more time out there because there was nothing else to do. And because of that, I started to notice things. I started to listen to the birds more in the morning because I didn't have to get up and leave and rush and go. So there was a slowness impressed upon me. And then I listened to the wind in the trees, and I just sat on this rock one day. I could see how everything was moving and buzzing and swaying. There were, butterflies and dragonflies and damselflies and bees and flies and all kinds of creatures just sort of hovering below in the grass. And I wondered to myself if I had walked through this already and not even noticed it. Everybody gets distracted with their own minds, with their own world, with everything going on, and the slowness of just sitting and observing and just being a part of the environment around me. This rock helped me to remind myself to do that because of the time I was able to write the book, because of the pandemic, because of the forced slowness. You know, you're always connected, but quite often we can go farther, we can learn more, we can become more connected. And when I wrote this book, I was able to do that. I was able to learn more. I was able to become even more rooted than I already was. And I realized that I really wasn't as rooted as I thought I was. So we're in the creek behind my property, and it starts way up on the mountain. It comes all the way through here. And it goes all the way down the mountain, all the way down. And what's really significant about this place is that what you see now is completely different than the creek that I knew growing up. I would come here as a kid often, either by myself or with my family. In the winter, this used to freeze over completely, and you could walk across the ice from one end to the other. It doesn't do that much anymore because, you know, it's everything's warming. Every once in a while you'll get a flash freeze and it'll freeze a little, but it's not like it used to be. But what else is different about this is just how wide this creek is, how deep it is. So I'm sitting quite low, which only a few years ago didn't exist like this. Over to this side here, the water goes down and it's carved out beneath the root system of several trees. That's new. So when the flood came a couple years ago in November, the same year that the Coquihalla was washed out, the same year that Sumas Prairie became Sumas Lake once again, this area flooded too. And I remember walking from my house, it's about a 10-minute walk out here, and I could hear the water moving like I'd never heard it before. I could hear the boulders, like the boulder that I'm sitting on, these ones beside me, rolling and tumbling over each other, moving with the water through the creek. It was unreal. It was not a creek. It was a raging, angry river. It was huge. And it was so big that it widened the creek by, I don't know, 2 feet, 3 feet on each side maybe. And it carved it out so that it's much deeper than it ever was, to create what it is that I'm looking at. It washed out a bridge that we had just up here, and we've found remnants of that bridge scattered throughout the creek all the way down. We have yet to find all the pieces and pick them out. And we have a completely changed body of water. Change is something that is always going to happen. It's inevitable, and the creek will find a way. So even in, you know, that catastrophic flooding, it changed the way this looked. And I wonder sometimes if that change was inevitable, or if it was, you know, our fault as humans. Or for, you know, maybe it was always going to happen. This creek has been changing since it first existed. And part of that is normal, part of that is natural, part of that is supposed to be, but how much of it is supposed to be? And that's something that I ask myself all the time. I have no idea. And I'm not sure that we can ever really know. But there again, it comes back to that awareness, comes back to that balance of letting nature do its thing, and living life the way that we need to. In this part in the book, it's I write about how the sun comes through and it changes at different parts of the day. I write about the sound of the creek, the breath of the water as it moves. What's significant also is that when the heat dome was here before the floods, I remember coming here to cool off, and I talk a lot about silence and stillness in my book, but there was a certain kind of silence at that time that was not right. It was eerie, it was strange, it was devastating almost, because there was not a breath of wind. The birds were not chittering. The squirrels were not running rampant. The forest was so still, not like it is now with butterflies flooding. I can see 3 or 4 of them over there. I can see the wind moving in the trees. I can hear the ravens cawking. They're loud at each other. I can hear the water moving, and it's a different kind of stillness. This is a stillness of self while everything is still moving around you. But the stillness that was here during that heat dome was something totally different, and I don't ever want to experience it again. It was as if someone had pressed pause on the world and you wondered when it would start up again. You know, I write about having empathy for a creek. I write about having empathy for a spider. Can we have empathy for these things that are non-human? My answer is yes. I know there are many people who would disagree with me, but I don't believe we can get ourselves out of these, you know, climate disasters, the way we live our lives. I don't think we can get ourselves out of that without empathy. We have to feel what the forest is feeling. I felt the same. I felt, in my own way, the way this place felt. It was very upsetting. It was very disturbing, and really, really uncomfortable. But even in that discomfort, I needed to feel that in order to write this book. I needed to feel the absence of the movement of the forest in order to understand what that movement does. We need the trees to live. We need the forest to work. People need to live somewhere. And so it is really difficult, and it is about balance. And I think it's not about finding the right answer. It's about pursuing the question. That's more important. And the more we do that, the more we try to pursue what is the right question. What are the things we need to think about as we harvest trees, as we log our forests, as we build houses, because people need to live places. This is the reality of the world we live in. And I struggle with that personally, and I write about it in my book about how do you find that balance.